Hey everybody. Unless something unexpected happens, it looks like Donald Trump will once again be the Republican nominee for president. And I hope we never let that sound normal. There's nothing normal about that, and it's unacceptable on every level. And so, because he's back, and because I still care about the church, as frustrated as I can be sometimes at parts of it, and because I still care about the country, I and a whole bunch of other people, probably you, are getting dragged back into thinking about and talking about some really loathsome public realities that we're all going through this year. So I wrote a book back in 2020 called MAGA Seduction, Resisting the Debasement of the Christian Conscience. And I've been rereading it again lately, and I'm making a series of videos where I mine that previous work for anything valuable that I can use today to keep making the case that Donald Trump is not only a danger to America, but he's also a danger to the conscience of his followers. So as I've been looking over my previous work, I find myself nodding my head and thinking, I don't remember saying that, but I agree with that guy. And I can tell when I read it that I was writing it in a hurry, and I'd change all sorts of little things about the style and word choices and whatnot. But on the important things, I still believe today what I was saying back in 2020. But I do want to clear the decks of a few things right off the bat that I think I got wrong in 2020 about Donald Trump, about the church, about America. And spoiler alert, I don't think any of these things are going to make me feel better about Trump or the MAGA Christian movement. But the first big thing that I got wrong is about Donald Trump himself. As much as I knew that he was relentless in pursuing his agenda, I thought that once he got beat in that election, he'd go away. Or more accurately, I thought that he'd be made to go away. Don't get me wrong, I knew that he'd never accept the results of the election, and nothing about January 6th surprised me given everything that we know about him. But I thought that once the nation worked through the logistics of getting him out of the White House, that he'd finally be forced to leave us alone and go make trouble in some smaller corner of the world. But he's back, possibly as strong as ever. I think we have to acknowledge that, which means that I was wrong in assuming that we'd only need to defeat him one time, which leads me to the second thing that I was wrong about. The reason I was wrong about Trump going away is that I was operating on an old assumption back then that's been proven wrong. It was true then, and it's still true, that Donald Trump's most important base of power is white evangelicals. But I was wrong to think that they would remove their support for him once he was defeated. Evangelicals have continued to support Donald Trump to an extent now that I just never imagined was possible. And it made me rethink decades of my own involvement in the evangelical movement. My opinion of Donald Trump as a human being hasn't changed since 2016. I couldn't have a lower opinion of him than I have. It can't go any lower. So each new day, I just get confirmation of what I've known all along about him. But my opinion of white evangelicals has plummeted since 2016. When I retired in 2016, I still considered myself an evangelical, but now I don't even know what that word means. I remember telling a pastor friend of mine in 2018 that I don't know if I can call myself an evangelical anymore. And we talked for a long time about whether the word has any useful meaning for the types of ministries that we've been involved in. But as 2018 turned into 2019 and then 2020, I saw evangelicals continue to follow Trump further and further into whatever new rings of hell he'd lead them, and just continue to make excuses for him. And I watched them attack any of us who tried to speak truth about him. So even though I hope I'm speaking right now to a lot of people who still call yourselves evangelicals, I just have to be honest and say that that's not me anymore. I'm glad that someone is still trying to be a force for good within the evangelical movement, but I just finally got worn out and I had to leave, sort of for my own mental health. And it's not that I stopped caring about the capital C church in America, though, the the bride of Christ. I just don't think the evangelical movement has very much to do with that church anymore. So that's the second thing I got wrong in 2020. My already low opinion of the evangelical movement in America turned out to be not nearly low enough. And finally, the third thing I got wrong was about abortion. As a lifelong pro-life voter, I wrote a section at the end of the book called Pro-Life and Anti-Trump. And I stand by my basic argument in that section, but I did get one thing wrong. I said I didn't think the Supreme Court would ever overturn Roe versus Wade. I said it was possible, but I doubted it would happen. Now, I also said that if the Supreme Court surprised me and did overturn Roe v. Wade, then Republicans on a national level would panic. And that has turned out to be entirely correct. It works in some parts of the country to campaign on a promise to ban all abortions, but it's a losing issue nationally, and Republicans have known that for decades. So I based my argument in that section on the truth, and I still see this as a truth, that for the most part, Republicans have just been using the pro-life movement. I said then, and I still think that this is true, that they didn't want Roe v. Wade to be overturned because it allowed them to safely play to their base about abortion. As long as Roe v. Wade was in effect, Republicans could talk about their desire to ban abortion without scaring off the moderate voters that they need in order to win national elections. Moderates, I think, just assumed that it was just talk and that nothing would come of it. But when the Supreme Court did overturn it, then Republicans in swing states became the dog who caught the bus, and they've been trying to figure out what to do with it ever since. So here's where this is going to get really interesting, I think. Like I said, I was a pro-life voter my entire life, and it's the main reason that I voted third party in 2016 instead of voting for Hillary Clinton. But I've come to see how that issue is getting used to lock pro-life voters into accepting any candidate, no matter how depraved they are. So I started to talk about de-emphasizing that issue, about trying to find some sort of a compromise position that would allow our nation to actually accomplish some things together to reduce the number of abortions and to care for life at every stage. Basically, to try to build a culture of life in our country that everyone could get behind. And then someday maybe win people over to our views on the sanctity of human life through them seeing our love and our care for the least of those among us. But I think I was about 4 years too early. When I'd say that sort of thing in 2020, I'd get hundreds of comments about the state of my eternal soul and all that sort of thing. But now it's going to be fascinating, I think, to watch how the Republican candidates on a national level talk about abortion. Donald Trump already publicly blamed the abortion issue for the poor Republican showing in the 2022 midterms. And although he's been advised to back off of saying that sort of thing, it's clear what he believes about it. I'm going to just be curious to see how he handles that issue this year. I know one thing for sure. If he makes a national abortion ban an issue in the campaign, he'll lose by a landslide. I just don't see him doing that. So how is he going to finesse it? I don't know. What I do know is that his advisors will try to find a way for him to talk about it that sounds to most people like a compromise. And when he talks in a way that sounds like a compromise, some of the very evangelicals who consigned people like me to the outer darkness for trying to talk that way 4 years ago will support him now wholeheartedly. And they'll talk about how wise he is for trying to find a compromise on this thorny issue. We'll see. I mean, who knows what evangelicals will do anymore. In the end, maybe I was only ever wrong about that one thing. I've consistently overestimated the integrity of evangelicals in America. Everything else flows from not realizing just how debased their conscience has become and how far they'll go to serve their leader. And I so badly want to be wrong about this. So if you're an evangelical listening to this, please prove me wrong. I haven't given up on speaking to you. I'm just lowering my expectations as far as possible so I can't be hurt anymore. So here I am. I'm eager to be surprised in a good way when you start to show that you have the integrity that I always thought you had before the Trump years. So thanks for listening.